Hey there, and welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Chris.
This is Tim.
And this is Adam.
And we're going to give our hot takes on the game that we just finished playing, Red Rising.
Before we provide a description of the game, we wanted to give a shout out to a listener who's been supporting the show since almost the very beginning. Rick Lorenzen was the first person that publicly commented on social media and gave us some really nice feedback about the podcast shortly after we started it. That meant a lot in the early days when 25% of our podcast listens were coming from the city we were all living in, meaning it was probably mostly us listening to it. Rick continues to interact with us on Twitter, continues to comment after he listens to most episodes, and shares us with other people. So Rick, thank you. I consider you our first and therefore favorite fan, and I hope to get to meet you in person someday when travel or cons are a thing again.
Thanks, Rick.
Now let's jump into a description of the game.
In Red Rising, players take on the roles of individual houses from the science fiction world created by Pierce Brown in his Red Rising novel series. Each house is trying to prove their strength and influence by recruiting the most valuable group of characters from a variety of casts, here represented as colors, and ending the game with the most points. On your turn, you'll play or deploy a card from your hand to one of the 4 areas on the board, and then pick up a card from a different area of the board. When you deploy the card, you get the unique deploy ability that card has, and you'll get a different bonus depending on which area of the board you pick up from. The 4 bonuses for picking up a card are as follows. Jupiter, where you'll move your ship of the fleet track, gaining more points at the end of the game the higher you go. Mars, where you'll take a helium token, which are worth 3 points at the end of the game. Luna, where you'll take control of the Sovereign token, which triggers your faction's unique ability, and the player that holds the Sovereign token at the end of the game gets additional points. The final location is the Institute, where you'll place Influence token on the board, and the players with the most Influence tokens in that specific region will gain bonus points. The game ends when any combination of players meets 3 in-game conditions, or 1 player meets 2 conditions. Most of the scoring comes from cards that are left in your hand at the end of the game. Cards all have a base value, but they will also have a bonus or penalty value depending on other specific cards or colors that are in your hand with them. You'll add the points on the cards and the bonus points, and the player with the most points is the winner. Red Rising was designed by Jamie Stegmaier and Alex Schmidt and published by Stonemaier Games.
All right, thanks, Adam. So let's get into the conversation. So let's start with gameplay and mechanisms here. And Adam, I'm most interested in hearing your thoughts on Red Rising.
So man, my brain is burning right now, to say the least. So that is my initial post-game report from Red Rising, and my brain's on fire. It's scrambled. The amount of permutations you can do from these simple rules. So there's suits and a color for each suit, and then their deployability. So where you put them out there on the map, it's just going from 3 choices here with 4 choices there and 5 choices, and then you try. It's just enough math to make you think you could try to figure it out, and it's too much math for me to actually figure it out. So that's where my brain is right now.
It did feel a lot heavier, didn't it, than what the rules would lead you to believe. Like, the rules were super quick. I taught the game to Adam because he hadn't read the rules beforehand in about 5 minutes to get started. I mean, you kind of knew the basics of the play, but the decisions on each turn were a lot harder and definitely required a lot more calculations, a lot more computation than I would have expected.
Yeah, I think Chris and I were just like, I think our brains were just, mine was melting. I feel like Chris had a little bit of that going on too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it was, it's kind of like Tim said, it's a super easy game to learn. But once you start actually making decisions, I mean, there was not a moment where I felt like I had any kind of command over what I was doing in this game. And, maybe some of that has to do with this being the first time, but, there may be some other things there at play as well. But certainly it was a whole lot more complex than the quick rule set would lead you to believe.
Yeah, no, we played 2 games tonight. And one other thing that kind of goes along with that, I think one of the reasons why it is a thinkier game than it seems like it's going to be is because there's so much variety. What the deploy abilities do and what their bonus points do are so different on all the cards. Every card is unique in the deck. I think there's, 150 cards or something like that. But the first game we played, a few turns into the game, I kind of had a strategy I was going towards. I managed to work it out. But the next game we started up and my starting hand was so different. The direction I was going to have to go was so different that it took me half the game to kind of get into a groove again and figure out what I was trying to accomplish. And each of the games felt very different.
I guess it can kind of hurt you. At least it hurt me. I think the first game, I had almost a good hand right off the bat, and I didn't want to deploy cards. I didn't want to get them out of my deck.
Hmm.
There wasn't much deploy ability I wanted to use with my cards. So I had those in hand, and I feel like I was losing out on those 4 or 5 turns where you guys like deploying cards, getting that combo and picking up a card that was useful for you. My deck was so strong at the beginning, I kind of plateaued right there. So I think that's an interesting balance between building your deck combination, the cards that combo off each other for the end of the game, and maybe get some cards that have strong deploy abilities at the beginning of the game. Did you guys notice anything there?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that you had a really good hand to start with, and I was thinking that in the game that would, if you had a perfect hand, that would create a pretty boring game, because the best thing you could probably do is not play cards, or maybe maybe need to, right? Maybe you still need to say like, hey, this card works right now, but I probably should, discard it to get a deploy ability, get some benefit, pick up another card, and then hope by the end of the game I've cycled through and found another card, or maybe even a better card that matches. After one play, I'd say that's probably true. And maybe if you're in the end of the game and there's 1 or 2 turns where you just want to do that scout ability because you feel like your hand's pretty steady, you could see that. But I think if you're trying to just do that scout throughout the game, you're going to miss a lot of bonuses. That way, a lot of opportunities.
And conversely, I'd say by the end of the game, if you didn't have a good starting hand, then you might be struggling and racing to find that. You might be having strong deploy cards along the way and picking up points here and there, but then you need to have a strong hand of cards at the end of the game, and you might not make it.
Mm.
So it's a kind of a neat balance. You might not, finish off with a strong hand if you have the deploy stuff early. And I think that finding that optimal combo of when to go from strong deploy cards to a strong in-game hand is a difficult puzzle.
Yeah. Did you guys feel like it was impossible though? Like were you in a situation where you just couldn't make a hand either game, or did you feel like either game you ended up, the game runs long enough where you have an opportunity to kind of find some puzzles, even if it's not the perfect one you thought you were going after at the beginning?
Yeah, let me jump in on that one because that was one of the things that I had a little bit of an issue with here. And that was that, I mean, I don't think you can start with a perfect hand. That would be almost impossible to do because there's so many different cards, so many different combinations that you can put together. But what I found was that there were certain things I had in my hand that really suggested a way forward, and that it seemed like it should have been a very simple thing to kind of find a way to make that happen, but then the cards just didn't play out that way. Just for example, in the second game we played, if I had just been able to get my hands on one orange card, just one orange card, didn't even have to be any particular orange card, any orange card, I would have increased my score by, I think, 60 points just by getting that one card. And so I kind of held out the whole game. Okay, an orange card is going to pop up at some point in this game, and not a single orange card did in the entire game. And so that actually made me kind of question, what did you guys think about sort of the distribution of cards here? Because I felt like that was a little bit of an issue. Like, in a lot of deck building games and in a lot of, games of this sort, you can kind of assume that you're going to be seeing certain things popping up. But here it almost felt like there were so many cards in the deck that you couldn't really count on much of anything.
The number of cards is there's 20 gold cards and 5 of each other color, I believe. I think that's what I read. If you think of it that way, the odds of getting one of those other colors is not that high, right? You cannot count on getting any specific color other than a gold. And you maybe can't even count on getting that.
So I had no clue that was the distribution. I think that would have made a huge difference ahead of time if, if I knew the suits were evenly. Maybe it wouldn't have made a difference. I got pretty slaughtered. Well, I did okay the first. Anyway, that's one thing that would have helped for sure. So that's on me. What about you? For you, Tim, I feel like you did pretty well in both games, and it seemed like it came to you pretty quick. And I don't know if it was easy as it looked, but it seemed like you had the score and point thing. You had that, no problem with that tonight.
No, it wasn't easy at all, but I had a really fun time with it. Like, I found the puzzle to be really fun, even when, like, the first game, and I'll probably talk about this in moments of the game, but the first game, my whole hand came together on the very last turn of the game. I mean, I had an okay hand before that, but there were several things I was trying to fit together and just could never find the right piece. And I got a really lucky draw off the top of the deck on my last turn. And that was awesome. I still think I would have done okay even if I hadn't done that. So I still had managed to kind of work the puzzle a little bit anyway. But that was really fun to me to find that last piece of the puzzle at the last moment. The second game was a totally different puzzle, but I still found a way to kind of put it together. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the decisions that came up every time. And the second game, like, I had a whole bunch of cards that were like manipulating cards in the yeah, I don't think because we didn't do the scoring together on the second one. one of the things I got the most points for was having a card that said I had to end with all odd numbered cards in my hand. And so like the whole game I had that card at the beginning, but it was worth 40 points if I could make that happen. So the whole game I was just trying to dump any even numbered cards, base value cards.
Okay.
And then pick up any odd number base value cards. And then I had another card that gave me a bonus if I had all different colors. So at the end of the game, I ended up not getting to keep that second one. But the whole game I was kind of working towards both of those things, all different colors and all odd numbered cards, and it was super fun to me. So I had a fun time with it. I did manage to win the second one, but it was a much closer game. Steve and Chris were both pretty close on me there. Yeah, I thought it was fun. It was hard sometimes, but it was still fun.
And I'm with Adam. I think I would have played very differently if I had just known the distribution of cards, which now I do. So I might play differently in the future. But I mean, instead of sitting there the whole game waiting to pick up that one orange card, maybe I would have said, yeah, you know what? Out of 100 and something cards, if there's only 5 oranges, maybe I ought to, go with another strategy. So I think that would have made a huge difference to me.
I knew that, and I wasn't even thinking about it during the game. Like I didn't really take that into account. But when you guys were just talking about distribution, it occurred to me. I think I'd read that. I'm still going to try to find it might be 7 cards of every color, not 5. But either way,
I should have asked. That came to me at one point in the game. Like, I wonder if it is even just, but I didn't even ask that.
yeah,
So.
yeah. The golds again being unique because they wanted to highlight all the gold characters from the book, so they put more of those in there.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
But at the same time, I felt like there were some scenarios where we were waiting to, like, I had some cards where there was a benefit to having gold cards, but golds never seemed to show up. So I mean, I'm trying to reconcile the numbers that I know existed in the deck to what I was seeing in the game, and maybe it was an anomaly, but I. Or maybe I just had completely crap luck tonight. I don't know.
Well, I think another thing that I had read was that the gold cards generally have a higher base value or are easier to achieve higher points with. And so maybe those weren't just being deployed as often. People were kind of holding on to them when they had them in their hands. I don't know.
Probably, yeah.
What do you guys think of the variety of puzzles? So from first game to second game, did the puzzle you had to solve, I feel like I know the answer. Did the puzzle you had to solve feel the same, or did it feel totally different from game to game?
No, it was completely different for me. Not only with the cards in hand, but I thought even the
houses.
The houses.
Yeah, thanks. So the houses, each have a minor different ability, but even those, they didn't make a major difference, but they definitely kind of directed a little bit some of your strategy. So the way I was playing with the board in the second game was completely different the way I was playing with the board. So regardless of the cards, I really focused on the ship track in the second board and stayed away from the Institute and, got some of the helium tokens. In the first board, I was all about the helium tokens and getting the sovereign token and trying to, end the game with that. So it was like not only were the cards different, but how I was interacting with the spaces on the board and everything, completely different puzzle. And every turn it could change because depending on what card you drew and what that led you to need to do next, it just shifted all the time.
Now, so I don't feel bad about myself. Chris, was this overwhelming for you? Or was it just overwhelming for me? Because for me, it got to the point of a little overwhelming. The amount of different puzzles you could solve and how that could change, not only from game to game, but from maybe turn to turn.
I agree with you 100%. In the first game, I felt at the beginning of the game like it was overwhelming because there was so much stuff going on. And then by the end of the first game, I felt like I'd gotten a pretty good handle on it and was able to, kind of put together a pretty good game. By the second game, I felt like I had a pretty good handle on it, but the cards were just, there was nothing even coming my way that I felt like I could do anything with. And again, I mean, that's, not necessarily the fault of the cards. That may have been my bad strategy. But one of the things that, Steve, who played with us tonight, said, and I completely 100% agree with, he said he felt like he was sitting there the whole time kind of at the mercy of, the luck of the draw of the cards and, what the 3 people going, after him would do. And that almost every time he had something he wanted to do, the opportunity would be taken away from him. And certainly to some degree in the first game and to a huge degree in the second game, I felt like that's what I was facing.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't feel that way. I never really, there was obviously people got in my way, things got in the way. I feel like it was okay sometimes. Like I would just change direction and pivot and say like, okay, well, I'm not hitting this condition, so I'll dump it, get the deployability, and go after this other card that just came up that sounds pretty interesting.
So because my hand wasn't, as perfect as it was in game 1, in talking about game two now, I did have to try to go with the flow, and I'll be like, okay, I can try to generate a good hand, and so I had to work a little bit more by putting a card out there maybe that I'd want to try to draw again, or picking something out there that I might be able to get back in my hand. I don't think it worked any time. I remember trying to do that like 3 or 4 times to get a card back later in the game, and I wasn't able to do that. Maybe the word like chaotic comes to mind. Maybe that's a function of the player count at 4, that the game state changes so much.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you guys? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think player count probably does make a difference. I think the game state changes a lot more at 4 player, and it plays up to 6 players. So can you imagine that game?
Yeah, no kidding.
2 players would go quick, and you probably would have more visibility, but you'd also see less cards. So like you're digging for that one orange card, you're just going to see a lot less cards kind of shuffle through the deck as well. So I think you're going to run into some similar challenges of getting to this stuff that you want to in a 2-player game. I will say that the 4-player game, I mean, the game still ended fairly quickly. I think we finished in about an hour, maybe per game, maybe a little bit more than that. But this is playing on Tabletopia with the frustrations of the interface and stuff like that, some internet challenges. It definitely, sometimes it took too long to get back to your turn, right? Like because of all the challenging decisions and how much the game shifted, how much the game state shifted between your turn. Most turns you couldn't really plan getting up to your turn and expect things to be in the same condition. There was some rare situations where you could, but most of the time, every time it got to my turn again, I was like, okay, now I have to re-look at the couple things that changed on the board and figure out a new plan, a new strategy, or make sure that I'm doing the right thing. So there's definitely an opportunity for some analysis paralysis in the game. And so in a higher player count game, this game could go longer than it probably should. I thought 4 was okay. It still took a little longer to get to my turn than I wanted, but I was still looking at all the cards on the board. It didn't feel like I was sitting there doing nothing, because every time one other player played something, I at least got to look at the cards on the board and see what it did, and then revisit my hand and say, does that card make sense for my hand? So it was kind of always exploring strategies, but I think it does. I think it could slow down a bit at a 5 or 6 player game.
I have another question for you guys. I was going to move on to player interaction. What did you guys think here? I felt like there was moments, there was a little constant trickle of interaction, and then there was a moment where you just severed Steve's limb in the first game, and it was brutal, and he was never able to come back. And that was when you had a card that forced him to banish one from his hand, so he's down to 4, and that 5th card can make such a huge difference in this game. And it really crippled him that first game, I thought. What do you guys think of the interaction and the relative brutality for a Stonemaier game?
Well, first of all, I thought the interaction was pretty interesting. Like you said, it's a chaotic puzzle. So people, if they I could see, right? Sometimes I actually picked up a card just because I knew you guys needed it. Like there were cards that you guys were just, was that the dancer, right? Because every time you guys both revealed that you had 2 red cards in your hand. So every time he was on the table, if one of you picked it up and played it again, you're going to get 3 helium.
And I was holding on to Darrow because I knew you had some golds or something in your hand the second game, and he was a huge bonus for that.
So. Yeah, so right, so sometimes you're definitely blocking the other players and trying and seeing or sometimes I would play a card that moved a card on top of another card specifically to block it from you, or I'd move a card out of the institute space because I didn't want someone to use the institute space or whatever, like empty that column. So there's a lot of opportunity to mess with other players intentionally. So there's interaction there. I also think that the interaction, and I'll get to the meanness that you're talking about in a second, but the other place that there's a lot of interaction generally is competition for the different spaces on the board. The most obvious one obviously is the institute, because if you have the most influence at the institute, you get 4 points per cube. If you have second most, it's 2 points per cube, and everyone else gets 1 point per cube. So it's a pretty big swing in the value there. And we saw it in that second game where there's a lot of racing. I stayed out of there, but you 3 were fighting over it at the beginning, and then Steve and Chris both ended up, stepping it up and getting to 7 on there. But you guys were intentionally taking cards from that space just to try to compete with each other. So you're watching what other people are doing. The sovereign token was a pretty interesting thing to me in the first game. It made a huge difference for me. The fact that I knew that I was going to be second to last, and I just had to hope that Adam didn't take that sovereign token on the last thing, because it would have cost me like 55 points because of some of the cards in my hand that needed it. But I managed to just make that space. I intentionally made that space not desirable so that Adam could have taken the 10, what he thought was just 10 points from me, would have been 55 points, but he would have gotten a card in his hand that wasn't that valuable. So generally, I find that there was actually a lot of really interesting interaction from my perspective. Going to the meanness thing, though, I don't really like when games have, like, they generally have a certain type of interaction, and then there's just one take that card, or are very, unusual to have a take that card. I think there's more than one in this game, but we only saw one the whole out of the 2 games we played, and there was that one time when I made Steve discard that card from his hand. And other than that, we didn't see that happen at all the rest of the night. So it feels a little out of place. And because the cards in your hand are so valuable, it's a little surprising that was there. Now there's mitigation opportunities for it, right? Because there are some cards that let you draw an extra card. So he could have potentially found one. And there's cards that let you block people from doing stuff to you. So there's opportunities to mitigate. In that particular case, I played it. I picked him randomly. He didn't have anything to block it with and didn't mitigate it. So he ended his game playing with 4 cards the whole time, and that was probably pretty rough to go through. So that's my take on it. I don't love it when there's just a little bit of take that in a game. If you're going to put take that in a game, it probably should be a heavy piece to it.
Yeah.
When there's just like 1 or 2 places where it can really mess up somebody's game, then that's kind of rough. So I didn't love it. I don't think it's the end of the world. It's a short enough game that you can play through it and just have some bad luck or have a bad take that situation, and then you can play again, and it's not a big deal. But it can be frustrating too, I think. What about you, Chris? What any thoughts on the interaction?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually this sort of goes back to the last question, which I finally got my wits about me and kind of have a thought on, and that was something about the player count. I actually feel like this is one that might be better at a lower player count, because part of the problem I was having in putting together a game was I always felt like with 4 players, there was so much stuff happening that I was always chasing something. And then like you'd have to kind of double down on a particular, a way of pursuing, your points. And then so you start moving in that direction, and then a couple things would happen, and it's not like the board was that changeable. There's certain cards that go down, but it's not like there's a lot of new cards coming out all the time. And so then someone would block something and think, okay, well, that's not going to work. So I got to try to pivot to another way of pursuing this. And then somebody would block that. And I always felt like I was kind of chasing my tail, trying to find the thing that was actually going to get some points. And I feel like, having 4 players, and goodness gracious, I mean, if we had 6 players, that would have been, I don't know what we would have done, but I think this may have been a good 2 to 3 player game. I felt like 4 was a little bit high.
Yeah, I didn't feel that way at all, other than just the timing. When we talked about fun in board games, one of my top things, right, was a changing tactical puzzle. Something that every time you kind of have to revisit and think about, like, what's the best I can do this turn? And this just hits that note for me, like, really well. So I think if you don't enjoy that, then that's going to be a really frustrating experience that you can't plan out and just work towards a strategy, because it's a lot of like what came up since my last turn and what can I do with it at this point.
Yeah, I think my issue with it was that it felt like, you couldn't pivot enough. I mean, you were constantly pivoting, or at least I was constantly pivoting, trying to follow, the condition that had changed, and trying to do what you were saying and sort of go in the direction of what was laying out there. And then so I'd make a move, and then by the time it got back around to my turn, there was something else that had happened from the other 3 players that made it so that didn't work anymore. So okay, let's try something new, and it just felt like a constant circular kind of battle to figure out what the right strategy was.
Yeah. Well, going to the other points of interaction, I'm just curious what you guys thought about we've been talking a lot about the card play and how that flowed, but what about the board? What about the fleet track and the institute and the helium and the sovereign token? You guys haven't really talked about that. What were your thoughts? Did you feel like it, did you like those parts of the game? Did it matter?
I felt it was very almost tertiary kind of aspect of the game. Like if it was there for you and you could work it, then it was nice to take advantage of it, but it wasn't a primary focus of mine, and maybe that's why I didn't do so well. But I can see that ship track, if you can work your way up that, it gets a little more exponential instead of linear. If you win the race for the institution, then you're doing well. Second or third, you're kind of heh. And then for the helium-3, is that what it is? The rupees, those are worth just 3 apiece at the end of the game. So pretty not super exciting stuff there, I guess.
Well, what it ended up being, I think, was like everyone who did well, like if they focused on a track, ended up getting about the value of a full card, right? Because you ended up with 11 helium, so it was 33 points. I ended up at the 9th space on this fleet track, which was I think 31 points or 34 points or something. And Chris, you probably had 7 times, so you had 28 points from your from your cube. So that was basically if you could focus and kind of like win on one of those, it's like the value of one card. The one thing I do think though that was a little bit interesting too is that there were some cards that cared about those things. So like you had that Quicksilver card that gave you an extra bonus if you had the most helium at the end of the game. So it kind of added another level of the race to say like, okay, I've got to do better. I had a card that said if you have the lowest, I got a bonus if I had the lowest on the Institute. So to me, it was really like, I'm just going to stay away from that and I'm going to focus on other things this game. So I thought they were actually all really neat. What about you, Chris? How did you feel about those elements?
I actually really liked those because I thought that mitigated some of the issue that I was seeing that I was describing before about sort of the variability in the cards and what's changing as the other players are going. Because the one thing that is kind of a constant are those different tracks, things like the cubes in the Institute or your ability to move up the fleet track that you can almost always control. So I think what I tried to do is if I felt like I was losing control with the cards and the ability to put together really good combos, at least I could keep myself moving steadily up the track in those other things. And I thought that was actually a nice way to sort of, a nice alternate strategy to try to get some points if you were having trouble doing it some other way.
Yeah.
And Adam, just out of curiosity, why do you keep calling them rupees? I don't,
There are some. They remind me of a jewel in some video game that was that shape. It was red and had that I don't know, like elongated hexagonal shape, and it was a game where you
It
collected.
was Link, right?
Was it Zelda? Like you connect the rupees?
Adventures of Link. Yeah, I think that they were called rupees there. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's totally what it is, and
Yeah.
they just reminded me of that so much.
because you kept saying that. I'm like, what is he talking? Like, what is he talking about? What is he? What are these rupees he speaks of?
But totally, that's totally what it is. I remember that from when I was 10 years old playing Nintendo.
One last thing I'm curious about for you guys. So you everybody complained. Both of you, Steve complained about not being able to find not getting the right cards that you wanted to combo and stuff. But I didn't see anybody really trying for random draws off the top of the deck very often. Did you just feel like that was too high of a risk to be, a thing, or was there always something on the board that felt probably more desirable than what you might get off the top of the deck?
For me, that concreteness of being like, all right, well, I guess I'll go for more, not helium 3 or for more instant. So the concreteness of an action.
Knowing what you're going to get off the board.
Right. And a lot of my cards would say, plus 10 points unless you draw this color card.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to take that risk
risk
of getting those negative points.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, Adam, because at the beginning of the game night tonight, you said one thing I really like in games is where you can take risks, but the worst thing that happens is you lose the game, and then you didn't take any risks.
I had that sense of excitement from this game because it is like for me, it felt like taking risks a lot.
Yeah.
And maybe I just wasn't able to keep up with it. It was like treading water with sharks swimming around me and some like piranhas coming and some stonefish below me. And that was like too many risks for me or something. I don't know. But I have that sense of excitement. Like, so it's,
I used the top of the deck several times, and I really had a fun time when I did that. Now, I got lucky a couple of times, like really lucky. Like I drew almost exactly what I needed off the top of the deck a couple of times. But I just thought it was fun to see, there's nothing on the board that looks fun. Let me see what's on top of the deck. Maybe it'll be something that really changes my strategy. And then you get to roll that dice. And, the bonus is almost always the same as one of the tracks that you're going to hit there too. So I had a really fun time doing it. I noticed nobody else really played that game very much tonight, but I thought it was a fun alternative option to what's on the board.
I think if there's one thing that I would do differently the next time we played this game, I think I would do that more, because that's another way to mitigate the complaint that I had. Because people aren't generally going to want to throw down the great cards, right?
That's right.
And so you're not as likely to get something. So maybe that would have been a way to kind of open things up a little bit and create some new opportunities. And I think I would definitely do that more the next time we played.
You're right, because basically otherwise you start with the 5 cards in your hand and the 10 cards that are out on the board. And if people aren't drawn off the top of the deck, then we're essentially just playing with the same pool of cards the whole game.
There was one, I forget the card I played, but it was one where you drew 2 cards off the top of the deck and then put them underneath the card you just played. It was one of the green cards. And I drew 2 phenomenal gold cards, and all of a sudden it's like, bam, it's a new board out there. It's like there's 2 new golds out. There wasn't a single gold the whole rest of the game. And so so maybe that's that's a good way to think about that, is that's a way to open up the game.
I see so much opportunity for just combinations emerging on subsequent plays. Like, I know they're in there. it seems so hard and obtuse for me to discover them right now. I
Hmm.
think that's what the problem is. So on subsequent plays, you would know, oh man, if I get this card and then these other two cards, I'm gonna explode and it's gonna be freaking awesome. What do you guys think the subsequent plays, how this game's gonna end up?
I mean, for me, I'm excited to explore it more. I had fun with the first two plays. They were both very different puzzles. I would like to play another one right now if you guys wanted to. I would jump in and just see what a 3-player game feels like. To me, I'm excited about it. It looks fun to me. It looks like there's enough variety in how every game is going to play a little different. Yeah, I'd love to explore it more. What about you, Chris?
I think it'll make a huge difference. I think just knowing the card count, I think makes a huge difference. Just knowing that there's a less likelihood of drawing one than another, or that you are likely to draw more golds if you say pull something off the top of the deck. Something like that I think would make a huge difference. And but the actual cards themselves, I feel like there was enough similarity. Now there was enough difference to make it interesting, but I think there was enough similarity that I think I got a pretty good feel for kind of what the different factions did, and kind of what the colors did, and kind of some similarities there. But certainly there's enough variety that I think
Yeah.
it has a lot of replayability.
I think where my brain's at now is usually in a game I can find the patterns right away and latch on to some of the patterns that I see evolving from the game. In this one, I know the patterns are there, but my brain can't lock onto them and find them. So I don't have that solid sense of direction for this game yet,
Hmm.
but I know it's in there.
Yeah.
I think it's worth mentioning that this game was heavily based on Fantasy Realms, which is a very light filler card game. We've played it a couple times before, but very similar mechanism where you just have a hand of cards and you play one and you pick one up and build off it. I just think it's worth mentioning that my biggest complaint, Fantasy Realms is a fun little game. It's fun if you can, you play it in 10, 15 minutes and you can put together some combos. My biggest complaint always with it was that you just really never had much chance to work towards anything. It's like by, 5 or 6 turns and then the 10 cards are on the table and the game's over. So if you get, a couple lucky draws, a couple things will work together and it's fun, but it always just felt like not enough meat to it. This definitely added that meat to it, both with the bonuses, the location bonuses, the deploy abilities. So not only are you building your hand, but you're also playing, you're doing some game in there as well. And you got more time to build your hand. I don't know how many rounds this went, but I would say probably 10,
Hmm.
12 rounds, something like that. Maybe more than that even. I'm not sure, but
Probably more, I'd say.
yeah, for me, this felt like if you've played Fantasy Realms and you felt like it was a cool mechanism, but not enough kind of meat to it, like this changed it. This fixed that. To me, it made it a better game. So I think it's worth just noting that those are very similar. On the other hand, if you felt that this was too heavy, you want something that's, you enjoyed the mechanisms, but you want something that's lighter, Fantasy Realms is a really good alternative too. It's a fun little puzzle game as well. All right, let's jump into the production. So we played on Tabletopia tonight, so we didn't get to see the actual physical components. I don't know if you guys have looked at any pictures of them or anything, but any thoughts on production? Chris, why don't you start?
I thought it was really nice. The art is, I think, really effective. It is, I think, incredibly nice that every card is a unique piece of art, at least from what I could tell. I don't think I
Hmm.
saw
It
any
is.
any duplicates. Yeah, and that makes
Yeah.
a huge difference, especially if you're a fan of the books, because every card you pull out. I mean, especially because we played 2 games, so there's a lot of cards we never saw, and it's like every time a new card comes out, you're like, oh man, yeah, I know that character. That's great, and that's a lot of fun, and the art really did bring life to those characters, and it brought a lot of personality, and it's not exactly my style. I like it a little bit more realism to it, and this was a little bit more sort of an animated look to it,
Yeah.
but I don't hold that against it. I mean, I think it does an exceptionally good job of getting that across. The art is fun, the art is nice, it's colorful, it has a lot of personality, and I really enjoyed that. As for the other pieces, it's a little tough to say, with just the mod that we played online, but it looks serviceable. The cubes and the little marker for the sovereign and things like that. It's got a small board, so nothing I think particularly fancy, but it's at its heart, it's a card game, so and the cards are nice.
Well, I'll speak to the art really quickly. When I pictured the world of Red Rising, I pictured something that was more grim, more real. I wouldn't have pictured, like, if I was the one, searching, if I was the art director on this game or the one searching for an artist, I wouldn't have picked a comic book style or animated, movie style of art to it. But that said, I felt it worked pretty well. Like, I think I still would have preferred a more kind of realistic and maybe darker art style, but it was pretty neat. Like, it was a lot of color on the table. Every character was unique and interesting. And like you said, Chris, I think it worked. Not necessarily a style I would have picked, but on the other hand, if it was all dark and grim and, maybe it just wouldn't have been as obvious to see. I think one of the things that you notice in the art is that pretty much every card, I think the hues in it, the tones, you didn't even have to really look at the name you could pretty much tell what color the card was just based on the art itself. And that probably lends itself well to making the game a little bit more user friendly.
I agree with you guys totally. It hits and misses. It hits in that it's colorful, it's vibrant, and then it misses on the same things you guys were saying. I do imagine it a little more grim and gritty and not so cartoony. But that's, again, I can excuse that because it is fun, and you look at the characters and you see the names. I'm getting a little head into a theme here, but it's nice to put a face to the names and kind of imagine the story as you see these guys come out.
Yeah, for sure. All right, cool. I'll speak to the production a little bit more just because I have seen some of the components, even though we played online tonight. But there's a deluxe edition that you can order directly from Stonemaier Games, and then there's the retail edition, which is going to be out in every other store essentially. They both look nice quality, but the deluxe edition it's got like a custom tray. I think both editions, if I'm not positive, but the Helion tokens, which are those little rupees, those they're little plastic gems, but they come in their own little fox-faced tray with a lid on it. So super easy to just pull out, put on the board. But a couple really cool elements. So in the deluxe edition, all of the components are metal. The influence cubes are metal. The sovereign token is metal. The start player token is metal. The fleet track tokens are all metal. So to do all of the tokens like that metal is pretty cool. Now, we don't know what the MSRP is yet. By the time this episode drops, that will be announced. A very high quality production if you go there. It also comes with some card holders. So like just little plastic card holders you can put in front of you and have the cards up in front of you, which I think is a nice, little bonus feature. And then the gold cards in the game have a gold foiling. And Jamie mentioned on the interview with him a couple weeks ago that it's actually a textured kind of foiling on there. So that's, I'm sure, absolutely beautiful if you're holding those in your hands. If you have the retail edition, all the rest, I think all that stuff is just plastic versions of the, plastic cubes and plastic sovereign token stuff, but it all looks really nice still. And the cards are all high quality. They just don't have the foil on the gold one. So it looks like a nice production for basically what you're getting in the box. Any other thoughts on the production, Adam?
Yeah. What do you guys think of the card colors, the suit colors? I had some issues with like silver versus gray. It was a little tough, or was it immediately obvious? Brown versus copper was a little tough for me, and yellow versus gold. I know there was numerous times when we were looking down and we're like, oh, look, there's a gold up there. I'm going to get this gold. And then, oh, poop, it's a yellow. I guess I'll flip my strategy 180 degrees and try to go another direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, these are the real life version. I think these are tarot size cards. So these are big cards. They're not normal playing size cards. So, it's hard to say because we only played on Tabletopia and the cards are tiny on there, if that would still be a problem in person. They write the color up in the top corner too. But I agree. In our play here, it was a little hard sometimes to see without looking really closely, whether it was gray versus silver, brown versus copper, and the gold versus yellow.
So quickly, yes, I got into the habit of reading the card color just to confirm. Yeah. That was a little catching at first.
I agree with you. I had the same issues.
Did you guys use the little hint icons on the left-hand side of the cards at all?
I noticed that. So you could get a quick look at what card they went well with or which cards they wouldn't go with. And some of them had just a picture of a suit or an X through that color of suit. Or some of them even had a little face. So you could, if you recognize the guy, you'd be like, oh, I needed to get this specific guy. So I glanced at that a few times. I don't know how much it fit into my gameplay. I thought it was useful though. That was nice.
Yeah. I never used it. I don't again, it might be more obvious if you're holding bigger cards in your hand and they're kind of in front of you, or you get familiar with the characters or whatever. So I personally never used it at all, though. I'm interested to know if other people find that a useful tool.
Yeah, I didn't use it a lot, but I thought it was a nice touch.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, any other thoughts on production?
Well, I did want to talk a little bit about theming, because I always want to talk about theming.
Oh yeah, right.
And this is probably as good a place to do it as any, especially considering that this is it's themed on a very popular IP. And in fact, that was one of the things that was Jamie's highlights for it. This is his dream game, putting together Red Rising, and I had mixed feelings about it. There were, on the positive side, I thought it did a very nice job building into the mechanisms some of the story. So, and in fact, this is an example that Jamie gave in the interview that if you're those familiar with the novels, Cassius is a high-ranking gold card. He's worth a lot of points if you have him with Darrow and Mustang, but if you just have him with Darrow, he loses a lot of points. So for those who know the story, there's a little bit of story in there, and I like the fact that there was a lot of little bits where if you know the stories, then you can look at it and say, oh yeah, I know why they did that. That's kind of cool, and so that was a lot of fun. On the other hand, in a lot of ways, it felt to me like a Red Rising themed fantasy realms. Sort of like I've got a national parks Monopoly game. And if you love Monopoly, that's great. And if you love national parks, that's great. And if you love both, that can be a lot of fun. But it doesn't change the game that much.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, I thought there was a lot of that. It had that feeling of I don't want to say generic goes a little bit far, but it has a mechanism, sort of a familiar mechanism that if you like that mechanism, that's great. And if you like the Red Rising theme, that's really great. Hopefully you like both, and then you'll really love this game. And one of the other two things can make it an enjoyable experience. But I didn't really feel like I was immersed in the world of Red Rising, which I know is sort of an inherent drawback in a universe that big. Like, how do you do that? So, but that was a thought I had. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about that.
Here I diverge a little bit from you, Chris. I thought that was one of the coolest parts of the game. So I just finished reading book 1 today, in fact, so it's fresh in my mind. Some of the cards, majority of the cards I recognize that were out there. And to me, having just read the book, and I'm still on that adrenaline rush when you finish a good book, looking at those cards and seeing what they do, recognizing the name and being able to see like, oh man, this card's going to work good with this and this. And I understand why they designed it like that. I thought that was one of the coolest parts of the game. And that's what got my excitement going enough. It was just a nice amount of blending to make it really, really fun for me. Added a nice little kick. How about you, Tim? What are you thinking?
Yeah, and it wasn't just the interaction between the cards. Like one score is better with a certain character, which was a nice. Again, if you know the story well, it's a great touch. But even going to interactions with other parts of the board, like Dancer again, right? He's a famous helium driller, right? He's supposed to be really good at that. So when you play him, you're going to get lots of helium potentially. Almost every card tried to add some theme into what it was doing with its deployability, how it interacted with the board components or with other cards on endgame scoring and stuff like that. I think they did a really good job with that. That being said, every board game is an abstraction of whatever it's trying to do. And when you're dealing with just a card game, I think even more so than most other, like if you've got a board, a game board that's got components that you're moving around the board and kind of doing the actions that the characters would be doing or that kind of support the theme. I think that's an easier way to demonstrate that and feel that when you're just playing a card. In this case, it was kind of neat because they were like, oh, if you put that guy out on Mars, then he's gonna, or if you pull him, he's gonna do something. He's gonna bring helium with, because that's what Mars is good at, is producing helium. Or if you go to Jupiter, then you're gonna move up the fleet track because that's where all the space bases are. So I think for the simplicity of the game, they did a good job of tying the theme together, but it's very abstracted, and I completely understand where you're coming from, Chris. It may not have been the ideal realization of that world for someone who loves the world and the theme of the books. You're just not going to get that full story being told here.
Another thing I thought was nice was there's characters that I didn't recognize and that we don't know that much about just from reading the first book, Red Rising. So you get a little bit of exposure into kind of what they do, and you get to learn more about their colors and how they're supposed to integrate into the whole Red Rising society. So that got me excited too. Like, oh, do I get to learn more about these other characters in upcoming books? So that's something I've never had a board game do for me. It was like make me want to read the upcoming books and learn more about these people.
Did you worry at all about the spoilers you would get from that? Like, were you stressed at all? Where you were like, oh man, now I know about that character. I can know who he interacts with.
Yeah, there's subtle nods, right? Like this guy can do this thing that I don't know about yet. Oh, I'm going to read about that and figure out why that is. So I thought that was really, really neat.
That's exactly what I was going to say when you were asking that question, was that there's a couple times like, oh crap, why is that? I don't know about that yet.
Yeah. I thought it was good. I thought they did a really nice job with the theme here. You make the point that it's hard to do from a card game. I think they did a really great job of putting the story in the cards there.
Yeah. All right. Cool. All right. Sounds good. Well, let's talk about favorite moments of the game tonight. And Chris, why don't you start? Did you have any favorite moments or moments that stood out?
I think probably the moment that stood out most to me was that that moment I mentioned before, where I played a card where it brought out two really strong cards, put them on the board, and I think that to me seemed like a huge turning point in the game. In that it gave me an opportunity, it gave a couple of other people opportunities, and there was almost it seemed to me a shift in the direction that the game went when that happened. And I don't think I recognized it at the time, and I didn't until we started talking about it and I started processing how the game worked and kind of how much that draw off the top of the deck could make a difference. I don't think I fully appreciated that. And in fact, the more I'm talking about this, I'm thinking, yeah, well, clearly that's the thing to do next time is to, rely more heavily on drawing off the top of the deck. But I thought that was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun because, you have these bland, relatively low, point cards out there. And then it was like, bam, bam, two big fat golds. And I just thought that was super cool. And just cool seeing the cards too, who they were.
Was that like Jackal and Pax or something? Or who was that
It was
brought out?
Pax and was it Jackal?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
Jackal, I think.
Yeah.
I know he randomly
might
came
have
up at some point in the
two
game.
big
I think
cards.
That's like two of the
time.
biggest guys in the book.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, great timing. Well, I'll jump in next because my my favorite moment, I think, or a moment that really stood out had to do with the Jackal. In that game, he popped up at the beginning. Well, the beginning of that game, I'd banished, is it Antonia, I think, is Jackal's girlfriend in the books or whatever, but probably get the names wrong. But anyway, so I banished the card early in the game that would get a bonus if she was with the Jackal. But I hadn't seen the Jackal come up, so I banished her because otherwise I knew I wasn't going to really be able to optimize her. And I was holding a card in my hand that said I could banish another gold, or I think I could banish it from play and then bring another gold from the banished pile back to my hand. So I saw the Jackal come up and I was like, oh, I've got a way to get her back and tie them up together. Just perfect. And beyond that, I had some cards that gave me bonuses for having the Sovereign token at the end of the game. Well, the Jackal gives you the Sovereign token when you play it. So Steve ends up playing the Jackal, or I don't remember. He picked it up, so it was off the table. One of you guys did. It was off the table, so I thought that my chance was gone again. But eventually, close to the end of the game, someone played the Jackal back again, and I managed to pull off this whole combo where in one turn, I got that banished card back, and then I got to draw the Jackal at the same time. And it was just like, it just all came together. It was so fun to watch that happen. And it wasn't even like, hey, I just randomly drew these two cards. It was like I had to go through some effort to pick up a card that would let me get something back from the banished pile, which isn't even always going to be possible. So that was really fun to me to just, put that together and have it all come together. I had a number of other fun moments too, but that one was probably my favorite. What about you, Adam? Anything that stood out to you?
That's great. And how many cards are there that let you pull something out of the banished pile? That's such another, just
not many.
So many unique puzzles in this game.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
I think the moment for me was watching you pull that off. I've spent the first game with a decent deck, or a decent hand, and then I was just kind of sitting on that the whole game, and then watching you manipulate all those factors at once, and then you pull out this incredibly lucky draw with your last play of the game, and it adds 50 points to the choose score. And if only I had done the thing that made me get that, I don't know.
Yeah, if you'd taken the Sovereign token, right? Yeah. No.
So that was just sneaky. That was a great play. So what Tim did was he put this card that was unappealing to me in the spot that he kind of wanted to block off the Sovereign token spot. And it worked perfectly. I went to another column, took this card that helped me out a little bit more. And if I took that card Tim had blocked off, it would have given me maybe 10, 15 points because of the Sovereign token. And it would have cost Tim 50 points.
Yeah, 55 points, I think, something like that. Yeah.
So man, he did it nice. That was just cool to see and watch him manipulate the board game state, manipulate me for a huge victory. It was impressive.
All right, sounds good. So, this is an interesting time to ask this question, actually. So, would you request to play the game? But maybe even more importantly, for you, Chris, I'm interested to know because you were interested in pre-ordering the game. The pre-order comes up in a few days. Now we've played it a couple times. Do you think you're still planning to pre-order it? And if not, would you still request to play it again?
So I have a really strange answer to that. And so this is not my favorite mechanism. It wasn't my favorite mechanism going into this, but I was down with it because, it's Red Rising. I love Stonemaier games, et cetera, et cetera. After playing it now, we played 2 games. The first one I thought was big time challenge. The second one, I was just pissed off and irritated the whole game because I just couldn't do anything. And by the time we're done with this conversation, I'm like, damn, I want to get that game back out again because I want to beat it this time. I feel like, it stymied me enough that I feel like I need to go back and really dig into this one and play it again. And that's got to say something. I mean, that really to me suggests a game that's got some depth to it, and like you always talk about the puzzle, that it's got some really interesting puzzles in there. So yes, I do want to play it again, and I absolutely think I'm gonna. Well, actually, think I am going to pre-order that as well because it's a pretty cool game, and if nothing else, even if I didn't pull it out all the time, I like the series enough, and it's a good enough game that I think it's definitely worth the investment. And I suspect with this group, it won't be hard to convince folks to get it back out again.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
Yeah. What about you, Adam? I mean, would you request to play it?
I would. Chris, I can't agree with you more. Like, I was frustrated and, kind of pained, treading water, especially the second game. First game was just kind of like looking around, too scared to jump in the pool. I can see the puzzles are there. I want to figure them out. I want to solve this game just like you said, Chris. So yes, I want to play it again right now.
I had a great time. You probably heard me talk about it throughout the night. I had a really fun time with it, both games. I thought it was a fun puzzle. I thought it was an interesting puzzle. I won both games, and so I know that changes, right? Like when somebody's having a bad game, and then it's a different feeling than when everything just came together your way and you had fun with it. But I just found the turn-by-turn decisions to be interesting, even when there wasn't a good decision. Whether it meant that I picked something up that wasn't that desirable because I got the bonus on that space and it was going to help something else, or whether I took something off the top of the deck and got to see what it was. I just had a fun time every turn with it. So the game kind of beat my expectations. I was interested. I was excited about it, right? I wanted to play it. I knew how Fantasy Realms played, and I expected it to be kind of that level of decision. And it's much deeper than that, I think. There's a lot more choices to make every turn. And they're the kind of choices that I really like in a game. Those tactical puzzles where I've got these things together, I've got to put them together, and it's every turn it's a fun new puzzle to try, not just planning something at the beginning of the game and working it. Every turn I get something fun to work at. So I really had a great time with it. I will be pre-ordering it. I'm looking forward to it getting in person. There's a solo mode on it, and I just watched just a how to play video of the solo mode, and it looks fun. And to me, I think it's going to be a great solo game too, because that puzzle's still there. The interaction with a different player isn't there, but there's still competition with the solo mode, and still it's more about that. I could probably knock out a solo game in 20-25 minutes, but I still get all those little puzzly turns every time. So that looks like a lot of fun to me, even if I don't think this is a game that my wife's going to want to play because she hates card games with a lot of text on them, a lot of cards and everything. So I may not get a lot of multiplayer games of this anytime in the near future, but I think even the solo play is going to be worth it for me. So I think that'll wrap up our conversation on Red Rising. We're just going to jump into some games that we're excited about right after this. All right, welcome back. So, guys, tell me what you've been thinking about in board gaming this week. Chris, anything that's been on your mind that you're excited about?
Yeah, a couple things. One, in keeping with the theme of the evening, I'm looking forward to the pre-order for this because through the course of this conversation, I've convinced myself how enthusiastic I am about this game, even though when I was playing it, at least that second game, I was kind of like, God. But yeah, so now I'm actually pretty excited to play this or to order it. And actually, as we were wrapping up the last part of the conversation, I was thinking, I'm not sure why this game is sticking out this way for me, but I really want to play the physical version. The big cards, I think, are really going to help. Actually being able to touch the pieces, I think that's actually going to make the experience way better than it might otherwise be. You going to say something about that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I do think that that's unfortunately another frustration that we have to do with most of our gameplays are on Tabletopia or Tabletop Simulator, and we don't get to experience the true tactile nature of it. So yeah, that's I think that's gonna make it a better game.
Yeah,
that's all.
And the other is not specifically related to games, but for the last 6 months, my family and I have been on a cross-country journey. Coming from California, we made it all the way to the East Coast. Now we're heading back out to the West Coast, currently in Carlsbad, New Mexico. And our next stop is in Arizona, where we'll get to say hi to you and your family, Tim. And
Yay.
it's I guess it's not a game, but it's you are the living embodiment of games to me. So looking forward to that.
Right on, man. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you. We should mention that Chris has been mostly just visiting. Chris and his family have been visiting national parks all over the country. So they're not out there partying and hanging out with a bunch of people all over the country in their cross country tour. But looking forward to having you stop back by. Are you guys? Are you after Arizona? You're going back to California and then straight up to Portland?
California and then up to Portland, and then we'll be settling in. And then, thank goodness I got Steve up there. I'll know somebody to play games with.
Nice. Yeah, right on. And he's got a couple friends too that he's known for years that also live up there that play board games. So you guys will have a whole little group going on up there.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Lucky. All right, cool. So Adam, what about you? What's been on your mind this week?
Not looking forward to much. I'm looking back in the past. We got another play of Beyond the Sun in there, and that was a fun play. It's sticking out, the Beyond the Sun, so that's still in the mind. And then I played this game Jet Set. I sent you guys a picture of it with the retro colors and the little airplanes, and that's fun. It's nice. Played it at 2 players. There's some nice shared incentives or a common space type situation, and there's a lot of player interaction. The trick is if you can pay or get others to pay you when it's their turn, you don't have to take an income turn, and you can do kind of some bonus actions. So you find the key routes and buy them up and try to get other players to use them. The colors are pretty hilarious. They're kind of that 80s fab Miami sunsetty looking colors all over Europe. So a couple of games I got to play this past week, and they're still in the brain, and I enjoyed both of them very much.
Nice. So I want to ask you guys something. You both backed the Terraforming Mars big box. Have you looked at the most recent update from it? Did you see the production where they showed the production sample versions of it, like the final tiles or anything?
I don't think so. I remember seeing some of the ships, and they actually sculpted some of the ships off the cards in the game, which I thought was kind of a neat idea.
Okay. So they sent out the last update. So they have the production copy done now. It's just in manufacturing, right? So like they're not going through any more changes. They showed the whole insert, and they showed the text, the hex tiles and everything like that. I don't disagree. So the picture that they showed of the hex tiles was kind of from a distance, and they looked a little brighter, a little more toy-like than I was expecting, because when you saw those renderings of them, they looked, kind of cool, like a dusky brown, reddish brown. They felt like they were really going to fit. And the picture that I saw, I can see Adam's looking it up right now, but it just looks a little bit more brightly colored and just not really what I had in mind. But that's okay. That doesn't bother me too much. It's still going to be non-gray plastic, like they're pre-colored and everything like that. So I'm like, that's fine. It's not exactly what I had in mind. Apparently, a lot of people were very, very unhappy with it. There was a lot of complaints going out to Stronghold on the Kickstarter page. People, complaining about how much they hated it, how it doesn't look anything like the rendering. And I think that people are going a little bit crazy about it. But one thing that I found was happening, I hadn't been paying attention to the comments on the Kickstarter, but I saw a BGG thread where someone said that they got kicked out of their pledge. So apparently what started happening is that people were just making complaints up on the Kickstarter page. Then Stronghold was just like taking their pledge away. They were basically just like,
do that?
Okay, because they're allowed to do.
No
they,
way.
Yeah, they can totally do that.
Wow, that seems so wrong.
Yeah, well, I mean, the people were basically on there like repeatedly, causing problems with or in the comments, right? I mean, I'm not saying it's a good thing that they did or anything like that. They absolutely can stop anyone's pledge at any time before the end of the campaign.
Wow.
And people got their full refunds, but they're not going to get this game that they've been waiting for months. So I don't know, a little bit of a dust up in the world of board games this week. But now, have you seen the pictures? What do you think about them now that you're looking at the pictures?
My initial impressions, I could see why people would get riled up. They don't look at all as cool as the initially indicated sculpts.
Now, what Stronghold has said is that they just didn't have any good high quality pictures, and so they said they don't really look like that in real life. And I don't know if that's true. One reviewer that apparently had their hands on it, I saw just a headline on it, but they said that their initial thoughts is that Stronghold's right. If they'd had better quality pictures, more close-ups, I think people would not have been as turned off by it.
I can see that because looking at the picture, the map looks like it's missing a lot of color as well. It doesn't look like the full vibrant, map. The planet of Mars looks very dull.
Okay.
It looks like they missed out on some colors.
Yeah.
because it does look, their color, the pictures that they have on there, the tiles do look very kind of flat and dull and not really that iron ore of Mars that you want to see, that iron oxide. So I don't know.
Yeah, I can see that too. Although, that looks also like it could really be something that is just the saturation of the photograph or something. So it's really hard to tell.
Yeah. Well, you'd think Stronghold, once they got that feedback, would have just taken some higher quality pictures and send another update and said, hey, look, it's not as bad as you think it is. But
maybe these really do suck.
Anyway, I'm still looking forward to getting it. We'll see how it actually turns out. I think, it'll still be an improvement over my cardboard hex tiles that I got with the original base game. The one other thing, though, that I'm a little disappointed about is that, now that this is about the ship, Stronghold just announced the Terraforming Mars. I think it's called the Ares Expedition game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this is a standalone game, but what it sounds like is it's essentially a streamlined, higher production of Terraforming Mars. It's not just Terraforming Mars, but it's like all the cards are nice, like good illustrations. The gameplay's a little more streamlined. The iconography is a little improved. And I kind of wonder if this previous Kickstarter hadn't come out, I might have been happier just getting that, that next version. Now, obviously I haven't played it. I haven't seen what reviewers are saying about it, but it is a little bit of a shame that I actually backed this Kickstarter, because I think if I hadn't and I wasn't all in now at this point for the original game, I might want to try the Ares Expedition and see how that played and if it was an improvement.
Is it just a card game or is it a dice game?
No, it looks like it's got a board. It's got a board that you put hexes on. It's got cards. So they're calling it like, Terraforming Mars, the Ares Expedition, a card game or something like that. But Terraforming Mars is a card game for the most part, right? So I don't know exactly how much has changed, but my understanding is that it's, again, just kind of streamline the game down a little bit.
Oh my gosh, you're right. It's a tiny little player board and it's a miniature Terraforming Mars.
Exactly.
I'm going to have to look at that now, because I remember glancing at it and thinking, whatever. But now I'm going to have to actually go look
anyway,
at
so
it.
now that I have...
Never look back. Never look back. Dude.
Once I have this huge big box with all the plastic in there, and all the expansions are coming with this Kickstarter as well, probably never gonna... I probably don't even want to try the Ares Expedition and be disappointed that I don't just have that.
I know, it looks like it's going to be better. That's so dang.
No. It looks too cartoony and oversimplified.
Okay. Well, good. No. Chris laid down the law, and he's decided that Terraforming Mars is better.
Yeah, it's official.
All right, cool. All right, well, that's all I wanted to mention this week. So I think that will wrap up this episode. I hope everybody enjoyed listening, and if you have any thoughts on Red Rising or anything else we talked about tonight, feel free to hit us up on social media and give us your thoughts. Until next week, take care, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.